Hello everyone. I promised you guys that I would make a final data visualization helper in order to be able to use sort of any data from the internet, as long as it's not a lot of data. I'm going to show you how to just kind of like go find the data you need, input it manually, and then use that data to create visualizations in ggplot2. So I will share this RMD file with you and kind of walk you through what's going on. So we're going to load our packages. And so what we're going to do, we're going to talk about what useful data looks like under these circumstances. We're going to talk about the structure that you need to think of as you're loading the data in manually, and then what to do with it, basically. So before we get started, let's just like take a really simple example here. This is kind of similar to the exercise we did in the very first boot camp, where we created a data frame. But the difference is, so I'll load this in. I created a list called Days in Quarantine. It has precisely 14 values. And then I created another list called Productivity Score that also has precisely 14 values. And I use those two to create a data frame. And what's important is that they're the exact same length and that each of the values corresponds in a meaningful way. And so when we go look at the data, it looks just like a spreadsheet, and that's because spreadsheets are really just sort of really well organized lists arranged as columns, right? So this new object, quarantine productivity, we did that very quickly, right? Here's the object here, over there in our environment. And just like any other object, we can use this to visualize data. So here's the data. This is sort of a formulaic example that's really similar to what we did in the homeworks and the boot camps. X is days in quarantine, Y is productivity score, and it'll be a line. So I kind of have a simple version and a fancy version. Simple version just uses the variable names with no labels, and the fancier version is the same information, but I just added labels to it, right? So you can sort of see that as the number of days in quarantine increases, my productivity plummets, and I kind of figure it out. Of course, this is not real data. I just made this up, so I literally type these in one by one. So, you know, like, just literally type them in. So we're going to talk about a more sort of useful example. So first, here's an example, a more complicated one. It's the same idea though. We're using lists that are thought out and organized properly. We're combining the lists into a data frame, and then we visualize the data frame. So this is an example from a book chapter I wrote recently about representation of women in Brazilian offices. So we're going to be creating 3 lists: year, percent female, and office. And you can see that they're quite repetitive. This one just says governors, 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 senators, 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 senators. And that's because we have to think about the structure of the data that we want in order to create the visualization we want. So you can imagine that this, when it turns into a column, it's just going to be these years repeated. So this percent female, these are our values of interest. So if you think about it, we can already see the structure of this data. For governors, in the year 2002, there were 7.4% females. For federal deputies, in the year 2018, there were 15% female representatives, right? So let's hit our code chunk. So we created this object called Brazilian Fem Reps out of the data frame from the 3 lists of values. So let's go take a look at it. And, you know, it just looks like a spreadsheet now. So office is a sort of categorical variable. Year advances inside of each office, and then we have the value that we're interested in. So we can take this data and use it just like something we loaded in and cleaned from VDIM. It doesn't matter that we typed it in ourselves, it still includes plenty of information to produce a meaningful and useful visualization. So now we can see by year how many female representatives there were for each office. There were not very many. So what we're actually hoping to do, these are just sort of practice examples. What we really want to do is learn to go and sort of grab data that we need from a website. So we've been talking a little bit about the World Values Survey. This is the data that Englehart uses and sort of is in charge of. And it's this fantastic data source that asks many questions, and they've done it for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 waves over time. So as an example, let's go into the most recent year. Since we were already talking about Brazil, we'll go into Brazil. So you click there, and now you go in and select your survey question. We were talking about women and representation. So here's this question. When jobs are scarce, men should have more rights to a job than women. So if we're interested in this question, we will click on that. So we're in wave 6. We're just in one wave. So you can see that in the year during this wave, 2010 to 2014, you can see how many people agreed or disagreed with that statement. You can also come over here and click on time series, and it'll go ahead and automatically give you multiple years. So we have Brazil and the years for which it's available. So let's take this data, and let's say that we're interested in the percentage of people who agreed with this statement. And as you can imagine, it sort of went down from the early 90s until the present. But we want to make a visualization just out of the number of people who agree. So this top row of data, right? Well, we could download it as a spreadsheet, clean it up. There's a whole bunch of like junk inside of the spreadsheet when you download it from this website. And I can just tell you, it's not worth it. It's way faster to just type these in. So here I have an example of what that looks like. 38, 35, 22, 17. These are just these values, 38, 35, 22, 17. So, and it would, if you were to do it again, it would just be as simple as this. You just create a list, C to begin a list, and you just type it in. And so, then I would type in my years. Brazil's missing one in the middle. There's a gap there, but it'll just draw the line for us. I'm not going to retype it, but this is what you would type. And then you would do this command, data frame, with your two lists. So once we create that, and this would take, 30 seconds or so, we could feed it into a ggplot. And this is something that's, formulaic from what we learned in the homeworks. And we would have this visualization over time. And it's just really fast, and it doesn't have to be a website like this where it's like organized data. You might be interested in sort of compiling something from news reports or from a government website that just sort of talks about differences year by year. You can put any sort of data into this and visualize it. So just to show that it doesn't have to be so simple, I went and I added the United States to the same data. So you'll see this 38, 35, 22, 17. This is the same data for Brazil. And you just have to think about how you need to organize it to get the visualization that you want. So we have Brazil's 4 values, the 4 values from the United States from the same waves. We have the years of the waves and the years of the waves again for the United States. And then we have what country it is, So just Brazil, 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 US, 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 US. So out of these lists, we create a data frame that's a little bit more complicated, and you would just type these in manually. And now we can visualize this with the code that we have used in the homeworks and the boot camps, and we can compare Brazil and the US and their sort of progress toward gender equality in the workplace. So fewer people agree that men should get jobs before women as time has gone on. It's approaching 0 in the US. So, you know, you could go even further. This is probably just gratuitous at this point, but because I could just copy and paste it and add to it, I did Brazil, the US, and then two indicators. So I went on here and I thought, what might be interesting to plot alongside this thing. So I would go in here to select countries, select Brazil, select the United States, head to the survey questions. Of course, I did this one with women for the United States also, but I also did one on religion. And I believe it was this question. Right, yeah, I think so. So I took this for Brazil and for the United States, and all I did was type in the percentage of people for whom, sorry, I have to go into the time series area. I typed in the percentage of people by year for whom religion is not at all important. So in Brazil, very few people said this, and in the U.S., it was also very few people, but it sort of increased more quickly um, and sort of started higher actually. I guess it didn't start higher, but more people said it overall. So I just literally copied this data in, and you can see that now, in addition to having Brazil, 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 Brazil 8 times, because we have the 4 gender indicators and we have the 4 religion indicators, and all of these 8 pertain to Brazil. You can see here in the structure we have we have to have a category for the indicator as well. We have 4 gender indicators and 4 religion indicators. So this is really just another example, and I showed if you wanted to reshape it long, you could do it this way. So now out of these 1, 2, 3, 4 lists, I created an object called data. Not a very good name. We can check it out, and it includes what we would expect it to. So we have this categorical variable for indicator, gender, religion for Brazil, the US, and then each year, and the values. So of course, we can feed this in and make plots out of it. Just kind of wanted to give you all several examples of what you might be able to do with this type of data. So there's another feature of this site. Let's say you wanted to do something with these values questions, because they really are fascinating questions. If you wanted to do something with these values questions with a whole bunch of countries, you sort of do have a recourse, even though it's not ideal. Like the VDIM data comes like clean and ready. So I have here an example where, you know, I chose, oh, it went away. That's horrible. Oh, I'm so sad. Okay, I'm gonna have to do it again. I know it's here, it's still here. So I have selected all the countries. You have to do them one by one. And I went in and found some survey questions that I thought would be interesting. There's the women one that we already looked at. You can look at it and take it over to the time series area. And actually, no, we're just going to do for the 1 year. So yeah. And what you can do, you can download it. And when you click download, it will produce an Excel spreadsheet for you. And it is not ideal looking. It has sort of like a whole bunch of junk in it, and it's certainly useful information, but it does not readily feed into statistical software. So it has like all of this stuff inside of it. It has spaces up here. It has images, sort of like written text. So R wouldn't really know what to do with all this, right? So what you can do in a situation like that, oftentimes you can just like roughly force the data into a shape that you can work with. So here's the original format, basically unusable. I just created a new tab called usable, and I sort of just like got rid of the garbage, basically. I just like, I copied just this row and I pasted it into this usable thing, and I added response to this column. So now this looks like data that can be read into statistical software. So basically I wanted to show you that even though there's an extra step involved, you can still load in this sort of like messy values data if you want to. So I'm loading in I took two indicators. I took the one about women that we talked about, whether men agree that women should have the same access to a job as them, or whether everyone agrees that women should have access to the same job. And I also chose this indicator, just kind of arbitrarily, just choosing sort of random indicators. So this asks if people, I think it hasn't switched yet. This asks whether homosexuality is ever justified in a country. So, I clicked all countries, so we're going to use this column here. What percentage of people in 58 countries say that homosexuality is never justifiable? So I doubt that these two indicators are in anyone's analysis, but I just wanted to show it as an example. So as I mentioned, I created these two sort of usable columns, these usable sheets. I took this like unusable data and I just literally copied this, which is usable. I went like copy, create a thing, paste it. And what I ended up with, this one actually is a little bit too sloppy. But I created this spreadsheet called usable, which is data that we can work with here. I'm not going to save this. And so I read it into RStudio. So I had to have this argument here, sheet equals 2, because that's where my usable sheet was. It's the second sheet. So once it's in there, we have to do some cleaning. We're going to take the data from this very, very wide format to a long format. So we have to pivot longer. So the first one, we're just going to create a temporary object called H, because it's just a list that we'll use to put into a data frame. So we're going to create an object using pivot longer, and so we're using dplyr, so this is our pipeline. So starting with the object homosexuality okay, which is what we read in, we run the command pivot longer. We're going to be pivoting columns 1 through 58. The names go to country, so the names of the columns go to country, and the values of the columns go to a column called PCTH, which is just %H or something. So let's create these. So I did the same thing for the women jobs ones, but there's this sort of like messy extra response column. But we can look at these. So, I created W. So it looks like this now, just country and %W. the original object, women jobs, this is what we read in. It had this response category. You know, it had more data than we wanted. We just wanted to know the percentage of people that agreed on this one. So we just kept that. And so this is the code to transform that. And then we created a data frame called data.hw by joining h and w using the country variable, because they both have that in common, right? So h has country and values, w has country and values. So we joined them to create this. So country and then the value that corresponds to each country. So we can do something cool with that. I mean, these probably would not be the indicators of your analysis, but you can choose something of interest, and we can plot them like this. So this is code that's really similar to something from homework 2, but I just plotted every country in this data, so 58 countries, based on the percentage of people who say homosexuality is never okay, and the percentage of people who say men deserve a given job over women. So, you know, you can see this relationship. I have no theory, but, you know, it's sort of like these are sort of unsurprisingly correlated values. So if you want to cite the World Value Survey data, this would be fine. And I encourage you to just sort of play around with this until you figure out if you have a project that uses really specific data that's not in any of the prepared data sets, then you can use this method and you won't be held up by that. All right, hope you enjoyed that. Have a nice night.